Hello, my name is Nelson Ford from the Gunsmith in Phoenix, Arizona. And I did a video on the setting springs and cylinder rotation on the Smith Revolver and told you I'd go into a part two. And that's what we're doing here. I actually did this gun today, and it sports another feature, a swept hammer bob, which is kind of fun. We'll get into a little bit. But I realized on the last one there was something I wanted to cover that's very important. I covered cylinders, but I didn't cover um, uh, measurements front and rear. And every gun that comes into the store gets a physical. I get the hammer weight on the way in. I make comments on rotation if it's not making it all the way into battery. And then gap, cylinder gap, and headspace. Gap, I like 4 thousandths. In the back, anything under 10 is good. They'll operate at 12. Once you get up to 15, you're going to have problems with ignition. People want them closer than 4 up front. They probably don't know that 300 rounds of lead reloads, you're going to get some pretty good buildup on that forcing cone, and you're going to close that gap, and it's going to drag. So 4 is good. Also on the forcing cone, something I've noticed is that, and this one filled out that way, the 4 thousandths gauge goes in nicely towards the bottom, but at the top it's a little tight. And if you ever have cylinders rubbing forcing cones, it's usually at the top, and you'll see the line on your cylinder from it, and it'll give you a terrible drag. And so I take an 8-inch mill bastard file, and I put a nice wood handle on it, and I go over to a grinder, and I grind off one side of it, not the flat side, of course, the side. And I grind it down, and then I go over to, I have a 8-inch, 12-inch muslin wheel at 320 or 400, either will work, and you smooth it out, and then you go to a felt wheel and you polish it up. That way you have a safe side on that file to use for 100 different things. But in this case, you're going to stick that file in there, and you're going to put the safe side against the top strap so that you're not scratching your top strap. These things matter. Can't scratch these puppies. So when I lay a file against it, I'll rock it, I'll teeter it, and then it'll give me a feeling for where I'm at. And then when I get happy with it, I know I'm parallel with the forcing cone. I'll lean it up a little bit, bottom up to your left. So I'm only on the top of the forcing cone, because that's usually where they contact. I'm getting ahead of myself. You color them with a magic marker if they're rubbing. Put the cylinder in this way so it's not, because it'll rub if you're putting it in like that. There's an empty I used to get headspace. So you color it, you put it in, you work it several times, and then you take your cylinder out and you look for the magic marker worn off in one place or another. That's where you're going to work. 10 out of 10 times it's going to be the top of the cone it's going to rub first. Anyway, I really wanted to cover that because also when you headspace a gun, or people say there's end shake, do you want to back it up? If you're contacting in the front and in the back you have 12, 13, 14, of course you want to back it up 4 thousandths. But if in the back you're already down at 6, some of them come pretty close, you don't want to go back any further. So you want to cut the cone. And so that's why I take the measurements, so I know which way I'm going to have to go on that. Anyway, so this spring has already been set in the fashion that I told you about. Now that I have the tools here, I can go ahead and just show you a hook on the hammer. Easy to do on the pre-96s, a different trick on the post-96s. And they get 2 different weights. And this one is right at 43 ounces. And that'll break anything. That's a good girl right there. And of course I get that weight by bending the hammer spring one way or the other, an inch up from the base. So I'm going to put some glasses on here, and we're going to go into the action. So we never pry up our side plates. We tap the frame, and allow the side plate to come up. That way you're not bending them. Right down the center of their side plate, and some of them can be on there pretty tight, is a groove for the safety bar. Gives the side plate a great place to fold. And when people bend them out like that, when they put them back on, they want to hold themselves against the parts, and the bushings are positioned differently. Now the parts are tight. You can see how this screwdriver's worn out in this area, and ones over the years, I've had to get rid of them because they were so channeled. So I'm going to tap the frame and watch that side plate come right up. And there's our safety bar. Just let her fall out. The spring has been calibrated. We'll pull her out. I'll let the hammer fall out here. So on the hammer, it's one of the first things I do when I get inside. I load the firing pin with a spring. I take the firing pin out. I use this handy dandy block that Smith sent me 1,000 years ago, literally 40 plus years ago, and I punch out the rivet. This is for restaking the rivet over here on this pointed area. We'll get you a shot of that. And this is rounded, and that will restake it in there for me. But I take the firing pin out, stick it in the vise between two pre-1981 pennies in a fashion where I can get in there with a cutoff wheel on a Dremel and cut myself a slot for a little spring. And I use the springs that they use to return the bolt. In the back, there's a plunger and spring. I cut them in half, and that's where I get this size spring I use for my hammers. And you can see that one's loaded. So let's see. Next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna lift. This is another trick here. School of Trades got me. The Colorado School of Trades in the 70s taught me how to cut these things. And what you do is you have a little lip on here, and you can put it. I put it upside down for taking it out. And there's your rebound slide assembly. I like to gloss these up like mirror finish. Plus, you really want to do the cam. This cam has to return the hammer. It has to lift the hammer up because the hammer goes down, and then when the trigger returns, it lifts the hammer back up, and then the hammer block goes into place. The hammer block rides on this cam on the rebound slide assembly, and so having these surfaces all polished helps because it gives you less drag. Now the trigger return spring or rebound slide spring is this 035. It's factory size. I cut them so there's 2.5 coils left out of the box, and that's where this tool comes into play that I made at CST. You can grab that spring and come in past the box and put it down, and so it's in place. So I'm going to take it back out and show you something I do to all the triggers. Now this trigger came grooved. Most of the ones after 96 come polished, and I radius and polish them because they're kind of boxy, and I like to make them round and smooth for double action shooting. And so there's a trigger. It's a standard earlier trigger, 70s vintage trigger. It has a sharp edge, and so I took that sharp edge off and I colored it back with Brownell's Oxidant number 7. I use a grinder first, grinding wheel, and then I take it over to a soft wheel, the muslin wheel I was talking about that I used on a safe siding my files, and I smooth it out, and then I come back and without touching it or getting oil on it, I use Brownell's Oxidant, and that gets my color back. So if all is well, that's all you need to do. If all is not well, there's a thing that happens called bobbing, and your camming surface on the front of your trigger, it's supposed to pull down the cylinder stop out of the way, and when the cylinder starts turning, it drops back onto the cylinder, and it locks in place when it gets into its full travel. A lot of times they're not getting the full value out of the front tab on the trigger there, and it releases it early, it actually pulls it down and lets it go back right back up, and that'll jam the action. And it sits on a let's see, it sits on a elongated slot, allowing it to return and go down, and then the trigger come back and return. And what you can do when that happens, you want it to purchase more of the tab, so you will elongate that hole further forward so that the cylinder stop experiences more of the front tab. Remember, when doing that, it also creates a problem back here. If it's too long back here in the opening, you got to cut it back here as well. There's so many other things. These little guys are fraught with peril. Sometimes when you're trying to get the trigger out, the trigger is slotted right down the top for that part to go down into as it operates. And sometimes when they get them in there, they just barely fit. And the curve of this, it sits down below into the trigger, and the triggers don't want to come out of the gun. And you have to recognize that, because if you're fighting with the trigger to get it out of there, you can break that trigger pivot, and then you're in a world of hurt. But if you're having a problem getting your trigger out of the gun, remember that these cylinder stops can be in the way, and you need to push it forward, and then the trigger, you'll find it will come back right back out. Another thing is the hands, when the cylinder is not rotating into place, these hands will come right off. They're on a little pigtail spring in there. These hands you can purchase in a vise, a grip in a vise, and then heat with like a #1 acetylene tip. I use gas for heating parts. Heat it and then just tap it. When you don't want to get it, it's got to get pretty hot for you to move it, probably over 1,000. But you don't want it to fail or lose itself. You get them a little warm in here, a little red in here, and you tap them with a ball peen hammer, and you watch on your vise. You can see it moving, and you only want to get a couple thousandths at a time. And one way to check it, if it's going to bring it into time, is pull your trigger all the way to the rear, and if it's not in time, push down on the part. While it's sitting there, you push down on it, and you see that cylinder go into place. And people go, why don't you just fit a new hand? Well, I can retime these things anywhere without parts. Can you? Why buy parts if you don't need to? And gosh, it's great to have the original parts in the gun. The consistency of these older guns, the case hardened, hammer forged parts and all that stuff. Great to have the same part, saved. And so you can heat and bend those just a little bit and get them to do what you want. And if you over bend them, you just take your 8-inch mill bastard or your 6-inch, and you just clean it up in there a little bit. These hands don't mind a little glossy on the gloss wheel too, so they float back and forth in the channel. So this is a great bob job as far as hammers go. And I'm talking about myself, I'm talking about the style of it. The J-frames, you can't achieve this because of the shape of the hammer. It doesn't allow enough metal to do it. And the post-96s, those hammers don't have enough metal to do it. And so pre-96ers are the only ones you can do it on. And you can do it on the L, the N, the K. And it's a great little look. And there's going to be some photographs of, I first take a cutoff wheel and chop it. And then I go over to the grinding wheel and I grind it down. You don't want to come through up here on your firing pin. And you don't want to exceed the profile at the bottom. So you're not going to be able to get it all the way down where you want it, but you're going to be able to get a lot of metal off and have your profile. Maybe a 6-inch grinder wheel. Bigger is going to be a problem. 8, 10, it's going to be a problem. And then I stick it in the vise between 2 pre-1981 pennies and use a coarse wheel on a Dremel tool, the drum sander bands. And you got to have a little finesse with it. You got to feel it, You sit there and you work it one side, then the other in the vise until you're happy. Then you take it over. I take it over to a 10-inch muslin wheel at 320, and that'll burn in what you want. You do one side, then the other side, so your profile is balanced. And stick it in your glass beater or glass beat it. Hit it with the Brownell's oxygenate, get your color back, and then your hammer's ready. When I set these guns at 42 ounces, they'll run like champs. if you're going to use foreign-made ammo, CCI primers, high primers are a problem. I had problems when I was at Cactus Combat League at first. When I switched to a Dillon 450 or 550, and I remember calling Mike on the phone. I think they were at the old store then, and I told him I was having ignition problems, loading ammo on his stuff, and he said, "Bring me some ammo and let me look at it." And I said, "You want me to bring the press?" He said, "No, not necessary." And when I went in there, he knew I was coming, and somebody said, "Yeah, he's in his office waiting for you." I walked in there. He had a magic marker out there and a machinist rule on his desk in front of him, and almost nothing else. And I thought, oh boy. And he grabbed some ammo out of my bag. I had a little Glad bag full of my reloads, and he went like this with the magic marker. And then he took a machinist rule and he went like that. And he said, oh boy, I can scratch the magic marker off the primer, which means this is not seated properly. And if you look at it, it's been hit, and which means it moved. The firing pin will move it every time. And so you hit it 3 times and then it'll go off, because once it's up against the cup in there, it's solid and the firing pin hit will count. But if it's moving, it's not going to work. And you got a big old CCI in there, the old hard ones, and it sits high. There's not a weight I can put. You can put these things at 60, 70, 80 ounces, and they're not going to set them off. And so he told me about these little hand tools, the primer seeders, the RCBS single handers. I don't know who made them, Lee maybe. And my dad would drive me to the matches, and I would take the rounds out of one box, hand seat them and make sure they're seated, and then put them in the other box and do that, because a guy working on guns can't have a bunch of misfires at a match. He's not going to get a lot of business. But so I thought I'd cover that, seating the primers, and that's a big deal. And to tell you the truth, this is my own reload. Out of every 100, it's hard to get people to admit this. It's like John Candy saying, who didn't cry when old Yeller died? When he raised his hand, everyone else raised their hand. I probably have 2 or 3 high primers in every 100 on my reloads. And if you're not using a hand seeder on the way to a match, you're going to have a misfire, or you're going to have a really stiff action. Now, the last thing I'm going to cover here, because I didn't cover it when I was covering cylinders and what have you, and I think this is more towards a cylinder thing. There's a little, here it is. So what we do is forcing cones, and I got the wrong one. I got the one for the 44. There are 2 levels on here, and you want your forcing cone gauge to fall between the 2 levels. And people tell me, you know what? I remember a guy a long time ago, he had an L-frame when they were brand new, and he said, I'm getting tagged on my right ear. Something's coming out of the gun. I thought, this guy's another one of these idiots. I took the gun out. I got tagged right off the bat. Stuff's coming back out of the right side of the gun. And I bought these tools, 81, 82, whenever the L-frame first came out. And I stuck the gauge in there, and the forcing cone wasn't opened up enough. And you can get these tools, these cutters. And there's a cutter for a forcing cone gauge. You stick it up in the barrel, and you screw it into it while it's in the barrel. Put your barrel into some soft jaws or the frame. And then you make a couple of cuts, and you pull it out, and you put your gauge in there until that gauge sits between the levels, and then your forcing cone's right. And that fixed that guy's problem. It also educated me on another thing I could do when people had problems with their Smith revolvers. Anyway, I welcome questions. I'd like to do questions and answers stuff for all my videos. So anything that you see on a video you have a question about, or I didn't cover something you wanted, go ahead and leave it in comments, and maybe at some point I'll be able to answer all those questions under comments. So I hope this has been informative. I hope I didn't miss too much, and enjoy your Smith revolvers. I certainly do. Thank you.